Mommy, why is Daddy sleeping on the couch again? Lily's innocent question, delivered with the brutal honesty of a 4-year-old, was the unwelcome wake-up call to another morning in paradise. I cracked open an eyelid, the remnants of last night's whiskey-fueled pity party doing a tango with the throbbing in my temples. Daddy's just tired, sweetie, I mumbled, my voice a gravelly parody of paternal reassurance. He had a long day at work. Work. Right. The ever-reliable excuse, the scapegoat for all marital woes, the convenient shield against the uncomfortable truth that was festering like a moldy orange in the fruit bowl of our marriage. 6 years. 6 years ago, Melissa and I were the poster children for modern open-minded couples. Swinging, we called it. A euphemism for ethically non-monogamous. A fancy label for we like to sleep with other people but still pretend we're deeply committed to each other. It had been fun for a while. A thrill, a rebellion against the monotony of monogamy, a shared adventure in the wilds of human desire. But somewhere along the way, the adventure had taken a detour into a dark, twisted alleyway. The rules we'd carefully crafted, the boundaries we'd meticulously drawn, had become as blurred as my vision after a tequila bender. Melissa, my adventurous, free-spirited wife, had morphed into a serial philanderer, her conquests a growing list of names I couldn't keep track of, her nights out a whirlwind of whispered phone calls and furtive text messages that left me feeling like a cuckolded accountant in a bad sitcom. "It's just a bit of fun, Adrian," she'd purr, her voice laced with a condescending sweetness that made my teeth grind like a garbage disposal with a spoon stuck in it. "Don't be such a prude. It's not like I'm falling in love with these guys." No, she wasn't falling in love. She was falling into bed with alarming regularity and a complete disregard for the emotional wreckage she was leaving in her wake. And I, the understanding husband, the open-minded partner, was supposed to smile and nod and pretend that the gnawing emptiness in my gut was just a symptom of a low-fiber diet. Then came Noah's diagnosis. The doctor's words, a hammer blow to the fragile illusion of our perfect life, had shattered the carefully constructed facade we'd built around our alternative lifestyle. The fear, the uncertainty, the sheer terror of watching my son battle a life-threatening illness had ripped the rose-tinted glasses from my eyes, revealing the cracks in the foundation of our marriage, the fault lines that had been widening with every casual hookup, every broken promise, every drunken night out. Melissa, bless her fragile heart, hadn't coped well. The wine bottles piled up like empty promises, her laughter replaced by a brittle gaiety that was as fake as her orgasms. The nights out became more frequent, the mornings after a blur of guilt and recriminations, her apologies as hollow as the excuses that followed. "I'm sorry, Adrian," she'd sob, her mascara running down her cheeks like a map of her self-destruction. I need to escape. I can't deal with this." Escape. Right. Escape from the reality of a sick child, a crumbling marriage, a husband who was slowly but surely losing his grip on the sanity he'd been clinging to like a life raft in a sea of tequila. And as I watched her stumble out the door, her perfume a toxic blend of cheap Chardonnay and desperation, I realized that the cracks weren't just in our marriage anymore. They were in her, in me, in the very foundation of the life we had built together. And the question that haunted me, the question that whispered through the sleepless nights and the whiskey-fueled afternoons, was not whether our marriage would survive, but whether I would. The coffee shop, with its generic jazz music and overpriced lattes, was the last place I expected to find an ally in the war against my wife's self-destruction. But there she was, Amy, Melissa's best friend, her usual bubbly demeanor replaced by a grim seriousness that sent a shiver down my spine. "Adrian," she began, her voice a hushed whisper that cut through the cafe's background noise. "We need to talk." I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. Amy and I had always maintained a cordial, if somewhat distant, relationship. She was Melissa's confidant, the keeper of her secrets, the partner in crime for countless girls' nights out that usually ended with questionable karaoke renditions and a hangover that could kill a small elephant. What could she possibly want with me? Talk? I echoed, my voice laced with a skepticism that was as much a defense mechanism as it was genuine curiosity. About what? She hesitated, her gaze darting around the cafe as if searching for eavesdroppers in the latte-sipping crowd. About Melissa, she finally said, the name a dark cloud in the otherwise cheerful atmosphere. Melissa? I repeated, my heart sinking with a premonition that was as unwelcome as it was familiar. What about her? She took a deep breath, the air hitching in her throat like a sob about to escape. She's not okay, Adrian, she confessed, her voice a mix of guilt and desperation. She's out of control. The words, though not entirely unexpected, still hit me with the force of a gut punch. Melissa's downward spiral had been evident for months, her drinking escalating, her behavior becoming increasingly erratic, her disregard for her own well-being and, more importantly, the well-being of our children, a constant source of anxiety and frustration. What do you mean, out of control? I pressed, the question a desperate plea for details, a morbid curiosity overriding the fear that was clawing at the edges of my composure. Amy's eyes filled with tears, her carefully constructed facade of bubbly optimism crumbling before my eyes. She's been sleeping with everyone, Adrian, she choked out, the confession a betrayal of Melissa's trust. A desperate cry for help that resonated with my own growing sense of helplessness. Everyone? I echoed, the word a hollow echo in the cavernous space that had become my understanding of my own marriage. Everyone, she confirmed, her voice barely a whisper. Men, women, it doesn't matter. She's lost, Adrian. Lost in a world of booze and meaningless encounters. A desperate attempt to escape the reality she can't face. The image of Melissa, my wife, the mother of my children, entangled in a web of meaningless trysts, fueled by alcohol and a self-destructive recklessness, sent a wave of nausea through me. But beneath the disgust, a colder, more calculating emotion began to stir. Anger. Anger at her betrayal, her disregard for our vows, our family, our children's well-being. And the kids? I asked, my voice a strained whisper, the fear for their safety a primal instinct that overrode any lingering affection I might have felt for the woman who had so carelessly shattered my world. Amy's tears flowed freely now, her guilt a tangible weight in the tense silence of the cafe. She's been neglecting them, Adrian, she confessed, her voice thick with remorse, leaving them alone at night, coming home drunk, putting them in danger. The words were a punch to the gut, a confirmation of my worst fears. Melissa, the woman I had entrusted with my heart, my children, my life, had become a danger to the very beings I loved most in the world. And in that moment, something shifted within me. The sadness, the confusion, the lingering hope that we could somehow salvage our marriage. It all evaporated, replaced by a steely resolve, a determination to protect my children, to fight for their safety, their well-being, their future. We need to do something, I said, my voice firm, the words a declaration of war against the forces that threatened to destroy my family. Amy nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a newfound determination that mirrored my own. I agree, she said, her voice regaining its strength. We need to stop her. We need to protect the kids. And so, in that unlikely setting, over lukewarm coffee and stale pastries, an alliance was formed. Amy, the confidant turned whistleblower, and I, the betrayed husband turned protector, united in our disgust, our anger, our unwavering commitment to the children who were the innocent victims of Melissa's self-destruction. We talked for hours, our conversation a tense but cathartic exchange of observations, concerns, and strategizing. We laid out the facts, the evidence, the undeniable truth of Melissa's reckless behavior. And as the plan began to take shape, a sense of purpose, a newfound clarity, replaced the confusion and despair that had plagued me for so long. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't about salvaging a marriage that had already crumbled beyond repair. This was about protecting my children, about ensuring their safety, their well-being, their future. And I, the man who had always prided himself on being the provider, the protector, was finally ready to step up and fight for the ones who mattered most. The key to a good con, I'd learned from watching far too many heist movies, was playing the role you were expected to play. So, I donned the mask of the contrite husband, the prodigal spouse returning to the fold, tail between my legs, ready to beg for forgiveness and a second chance. "Melissa, honey," I crooned, stepping over a strategically placed pile of discarded toys and questionable laundry. "I'm home." She emerged from the depths of our bedroom, her eyes narrowed with suspicion, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "Home?" she scoffed, her voice dripping with a disdain that would curdle milk. "What do you mean, home? I thought you'd found a new residence, a cozy little bachelor pad where you could drown your sorrows in peace." "Don't be ridiculous, Melissa," I said, my voice a carefully modulated blend of hurt and contrition. "This is my home. You're my wife. And those," I gestured towards the cacophony of cartoons emanating from the living room, "are my children." "Your children?" she echoed, her voice rising with an indignation that was as predictable as it was tiresome. "The children you've been neglecting for the past few weeks? The children you abandoned to deal with my... Your what? Melissa?" I pressed, my voice dangerously calm, the recorder tucked discreetly in my pocket, capturing every syllable of her self-incriminating tirade. "Your insatiable need for male attention? Your nightly rendezvous with a rotating cast of strangers? Your complete disregard for the well-being of the two innocent lives you brought into this world?" Her face contorted with a fury that was as unattractive as it was revealing. You have no right," she sputtered, her carefully manicured nails digging into the palms of her hands. "You're the one who what, Melissa?" I challenged, my voice rising now, the anger I had kept bottled up for months finally bubbling to the surface. "Who worked his ass off to provide for this family? Who put you through school, supported your every whim, turned a blind eye to your increasingly reckless behavior? Who, Melissa? Who?" "Get out!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with a hysteria that bordered on comical. "Get out of my house! I'm calling the police!" "Be my guest," I said, my voice laced with a chilling calm that seemed to unnerve her more than any threat. "Tell them about the abusive husband, the violent spouse, the monster you've created in your twisted little narrative. Tell them, Melissa. Tell them everything." She lunged for the phone, her fingers fumbling with the buttons, her eyes wild with a panic that was as satisfying as it was disturbing. I watched her, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and a grim satisfaction. The trap was sprung, the bait taken, the performance about to reach its dramatic climax. The sirens wailed in the distance, their approach a symphony of impending justice. I stood my ground, my arms crossed, my expression a mask of righteous indignation. The police arrived, their questions sharp, their eyes assessing the scene, the tension palpable. Melissa, her voice a tremulous blend of victimhood and accusation, launched into her well-rehearsed performance, her tears flowing freely, her words painting a picture of a tyrannical husband, a violent brute who had driven her to the brink of despair. But the performance was short-lived. I calmly presented the recording, the evidence of her own words, her own confessions, her own blatant disregard for her children's safety, laid bare for all to hear. The officers exchanged glances, their initial skepticism melting into a mixture of disgust and disbelief. And as the handcuffs clicked shut around Melissa's wrists, her cries of protest echoing through the once peaceful home, a wave of relief washed over me, a sense of victory that was as bittersweet as it was undeniable. The children, bless their innocent hearts, slept soundly through the commotion, their dreams undisturbed by the drama that was unfolding around them. I tucked them in, their soft breaths a comforting rhythm against the chaos that had become my life. And as I looked at their peaceful faces, a new resolve solidified within me. I would protect them, fight for them, ensure their safety and well-being. no matter the cost. Melissa might have thought she could manipulate the situation, play the victim, twist the narrative to her advantage. But she had underestimated me, underestimated the lengths I would go to protect my children, underestimated the power of truth, the strength of a father's love. The game was far from over, but the first battle had been won. And as I walked out of the house, the police cars' flashing lights illuminating the darkness, I knew that this was just the beginning of my fight for freedom, for justice, for the future that my children and I deserved. The credit card statements arrived like a flock of vultures, their stark black and white figures circling the carcass of my dwindling bank account. Melissa, it seemed, was celebrating her newfound freedom with a spending spree that would make a Kardashian blush. Designer handbags, shoes that cost more than my first car, spa treatments that could bankrupt a small nation. It was a veritable orgy of retail therapy, a desperate attempt to fill the void in her soul with material possessions. "She's out of control, Adrian," Amy reported, her voice a mix of disgust and concern as she relayed the latest intel from the front lines of Melissa's self-destruction. "She's maxing out your credit cards, draining your savings, and leaving a trail of unpaid bills that could stretch from here to the moon." "Jesus Christ," I muttered, rubbing my temples, the headache a constant companion in this ongoing saga of marital mayhem. "Does she even realize what she's doing?" "I don't think she cares," Amy sighed, her voice heavy with a weariness that mirrored my own. "She's drinking heavily, Adrian. Every night. It's like she's trying to obliterate herself." The image of Melissa, my once vibrant and vivacious wife, now a shadow of her former self, drowning her sorrows in a bottle, sent a shiver down my spine. The anger, the resentment, the sheer frustration at her reckless behavior, battled with a growing sense of pity, a concern for the woman who, despite her flaws, had once held my heart, shared my life, and mothered my children. "We need to stop her, Amy," I said, my voice firm, the determination hardening my resolve. "This isn't just about money anymore. This is about her health, her well-being, her future." "I know," Amy agreed, her voice laced with a steely determination that surprised and reassured me. "But how? We can't force her into rehab. We can't control her spending. We can protect ourselves," I interrupted, my mind already racing with a new strategy, a plan to mitigate the financial damage and safeguard my own future, and more importantly, the future of my children. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and clandestine meetings with my financial advisor. I transferred assets, closed joint accounts, and established a firewall between Melissa's self-destructive spending habits and the financial stability I had worked so hard to build. "You're sure about this, Mr. Carter?" My advisor, a man whose cautious demeanor was as reassuring as his impeccable credentials, questioned, his brow furrowed with concern. "Absolutely," I confirmed, my voice unwavering. "It's time to cut the lifeline, Mr. Davis. It's time to protect myself and my children from the consequences of her actions." The process was cold, clinical, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil that raged within me. But with each transfer, each closed account, each strategic maneuver, a sense of control, a newfound power, began to replace the helplessness that had plagued me for so long. Melissa, when she finally realized the extent of my actions, unleashed a fury that would make a hurricane blush. Her phone calls were a torrent of accusations, threats, and self-pitying lamentations that bounced off the shield of my indifference. You bastard!" she shrieked, her voice a venomous hiss that echoed through the phone. "You've stolen my money. You've left me with nothing." "You left yourself with nothing, Melissa," I corrected, my voice calm, the detachment a testament to my newfound resolve. "I'm just cleaning up the mess you created." The silence that followed was punctuated by a muffled sob, a pathetic attempt to elicit sympathy that only solidified my determination. She had gambled and lost, her reckless pursuit of pleasure leaving her stranded on the shores of reality, the tide of consequences rising to engulf her. And as I hung up the phone, the dial tone a symphony of finality, A strange mix of emotions washed over me. Frustration, yes, at the damage she had caused, the financial strain she had imposed, but also a growing sense of pity, a concern for the woman who, despite her flaws, was still the mother of my children, a woman whose self-destructive spiral was a tragedy in its own right. The game was far from over, but the playing field had shifted. I had taken control, protected my assets, and drawn a line in the sand. Melissa might be drowning in her own chaos, but I and my children would not be dragged down with her. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I was no longer a passive observer, a victim of her recklessness. I was a player, a strategist, a man determined to shape his own destiny, to protect his family, and to emerge from the storm stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. The living room, usually a battleground of scattered toys and neglected chores, was eerily tidy, the air thick with a tension that clung to the furniture like a shroud. Melissa sat on the sofa, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale and drawn, the remnants of last night's bender evident in the tremor of her hands and the faint scent of stale alcohol that clung to her clothes. Amy and I sat opposite her, our faces a carefully constructed mask of concern, our voices a symphony of controlled emotions. This wasn't about revenge, about payback, about reveling in her downfall. This was about intervention, about offering a lifeline, about trying to salvage the wreckage of a woman who, despite her flaws, was still the mother of my children. "Melissa," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, the anger tempered by a weary sadness. "We're worried about you." She scoffed, a hollow sound that echoed the emptiness in her eyes. "Worried? Why? Because I had a few drinks? Because I went out with some friends? Because I'm finally having some fun?" "Fun?" Amy echoed, her voice laced with a gentle reproach. "Is that what you call it, Melissa? The reckless spending, the drunken nights, the neglect of your children?" Melissa's carefully constructed facade crumbled, her defiance melting into a puddle of self-pity. "You don't understand," she whimpered, her voice cracking with a vulnerability that was as unsettling as it was familiar. "You have no idea what I'm going through." "No, Melissa," I countered, my voice firm but compassionate. "You're the one who doesn't understand. You're the one who's blind to the damage you're doing, to yourself, to your children, to the people who love you." We laid it all out then. The evidence of her self-destruction spread before her like a grotesque tapestry. The credit card statements, the empty bottles, the tearful confessions of neglected children, the whispered reports of drunken escapades and reckless encounters. "This isn't you, Melissa," Amy pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. "This isn't the woman I know, the friend I love, the mother I respect." "You've lost your way," I added, my voice softening, the anger giving way to a genuine concern for the woman who, despite her betrayals, was still a part of me, a part of the life we had built together. "But you can find your way back. We can help you." The tears flowed freely now, her sobs a release of the pain, the guilt, the self-loathing that had been festering within her. And as I watched her crumble, a flicker of hope ignited within me, a fragile ember in the darkness of our despair. Perhaps this was the turning point, the moment of clarity that would lead her back from the brink, the catalyst for a healing that was long overdue. I need help," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "We know," Amy said, her voice soothing, her hand reaching out to offer a comfort that I could no longer provide. "And we're here for you. We'll help you find the help you need." The decision to admit herself to an inpatient facility was a difficult one, a surrender to the demons that had plagued her, a recognition of the battle she could no longer fight alone. But it was also a brave one, a step towards redemption, a chance to reclaim her life, her sanity, her role as a mother. As I watched her being escorted out of the house, her shoulders slumped with defeat, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and a fragile hope, a wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Anger, yes, at the betrayal, the lies, the years of wasted love. Sadness, certainly, for the woman she had become, the life we had lost. But also a lingering hope, a flicker of belief in the possibility of redemption, the chance for a new beginning, a future where healing, forgiveness, and perhaps even a different kind of love could emerge from the ashes of our broken past. The law firm's plush carpets and mahogany furniture were a far cry from the chaos of my home life, a welcome sanctuary of order and logic in the midst of the emotional hurricane that was my divorce. Mr. Peterson, my attorney, a man whose sharp suits and sharper wit were as reassuring as his reputation for winning impossible cases, leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes scanning the dossier I had meticulously compiled. "Well, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed the gravity of the situation, "you've certainly been busy." "Busy," I echoed, a wry smile twisting my lips. "That's one way to put it. I prefer proactive, or maybe desperately trying to salvage some semblance of sanity from the wreckage of my life." Peterson chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that was somehow comforting in its lack of pretense. "Fair enough, but let's focus on the task at hand, shall we? Securing your freedom, your assets, and most importantly, your children." I nodded, the determination hardening my resolve. "That's the goal, Mr. Peterson. No more games, no more compromises, no more sacrificing my own well-being for the sake of a woman who clearly doesn't give a damn about me or our kids." We spent the next few hours dissecting the evidence, the infidelity, the substance abuse, the reckless endangerment, a litany of Melissa's transgressions laid bare on his polished desk. Peterson, his eyes gleaming with a predatory intensity that was both unsettling and strangely reassuring, listened intently, his occasional grunts of approval a symphony of legal validation. "This is impressive, Mr. Carter," he finally said, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "You've done your homework, and you've got a strong case, a very strong case." "Good," I said, my voice firm, "because I'm not backing down. I'm not settling for anything less than full custody. Those kids deserve a stable, loving home, and I'm the only one who can provide that." Peterson nodded, his smile a shark's grin that promised a swift and decisive victory. "Don't worry, Mr. Carter," he assured me. "We'll fight tooth and nail. We'll expose her lies, discredit her claims, and make sure the judge sees her for who she truly is, a danger to herself and her children." The legal battle loomed, a daunting prospect that both terrified and exhilarated me. But as I walked out of Peterson's office, the city lights blurring into a metaphorical battlefield, a newfound confidence surged within me. I was no longer the passive victim, the cuckolded husband, the man who had allowed himself to be manipulated and taken advantage of. I was a warrior, a protector, a father fighting for his children's future. The divorce might be messy, painful, a public spectacle of a private breakdown, but it was also a liberation, a chance to reclaim my life, my sanity, my right to happiness. And as I looked ahead to the courtroom showdown, the evidence stacked in my favor, the truth on my side, a grim satisfaction settled in my gut. Melissa might have thought she could get away with her lies, her betrayals, her reckless disregard for our family, but she had underestimated me, underestimated the strength of a father's love, underestimated the power of a man who had finally found his voice, his resolve, his determination to fight for what was rightfully his. The conference room, sterile and suffocating, was a battleground of legal maneuvering and thinly veiled hostility. Melissa's lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, a man whose slicked-back hair and condescending smirk were as off-putting as his reputation for twisting facts and exploiting loopholes, leaned forward, his eyes boring into me with a predatory intensity that would make a shark blush. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice a smooth baritone that oozed insincerity, "you claim that your wife is an unfit mother, yet you allowed her to be the primary caregiver for your children for the past 6 years. How do you explain that?" "I trusted her," I replied, my voice level, my gaze unwavering. "I believed in our marriage, in our partnership, in her commitment to our family. I was wrong." Caldwell's smirk widened, his eyes gleaming with a triumph that was as premature as it was irritating. "So, you admit to being naive, Mr. Carter, to being blind to your wife's shortcomings." "I admit to being deceived, Mr. Caldwell," I corrected, my voice hardening with a touch of the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. Deceived by a woman who was more interested in fulfilling her own desires than in fulfilling her responsibilities as a wife and a mother. "Responsibilities," he scoffed, his tone dripping with disdain. "You expect your wife to be a stay-at-home mom, to sacrifice her own career, her own ambitions for the sake of your children? Isn't that a bit old-fashioned, Mr. Carter? I expect my wife to prioritize our children's well-being above her own selfish pursuits," I countered, my voice rising with the indignation that had been simmering for months. "I expect her to be a responsible parent, not a party girl who leaves her kids unattended while she chases after the next meaningless conquest." Caldwell's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing with a frustration that was as satisfying as it was fleeting. He shifted tactics, his questions now a series of carefully crafted jabs aimed at undermining my credibility, painting me as an emotionally distant workaholic who had neglected his wife and driven her to seek solace in the arms of others. "You work long hours, Mr. Carter," he observed, his voice laced with a subtle accusation. "You travel frequently. You're often absent from your children's lives. Isn't it possible that your wife's indiscretions, shall we say, were a result of your own emotional unavailability?" "It's possible that my wife's lack of self-control and basic human decency were a result of her own flawed character," I retorted, my voice laced with a sardonic amusement that seemed to irritate him even further. "But I wouldn't expect you to understand that, Mr. Caldwell. After all, you're being paid to defend the indefensible." The hours stretched on, the deposition a grueling test of patience and composure. But with each question, each accusation, each attempt to twist the truth, my resolve strengthened, my determination to protect my children growing fiercer. I parried Caldwell's attacks with carefully crafted answers, my words a blend of honesty, indignation, and a subtle disdain for the legal maneuvering that was as transparent as it was tiresome. The evidence I had gathered, the credit card statements, the emails, the witness testimonies, was a fortress, its walls impenetrable to Caldwell's attempts to undermine my case. And as the deposition drew to a close, a sense of weary satisfaction settled over me. I had weathered the storm, exposed the lies, and laid bare the truth. The battle was far from over, but I had drawn first blood, and as I walked out of the conference room, the city lights a blur through the window, I knew that I was one step closer to securing my freedom, my children's future, and the justice that had been denied for far too long. The courtroom, a stage for human drama disguised as legal proceedings, buzzed with a tension that crackled like static electricity. I sat beside Mr. Peterson, my lawyer, his stoic presence a reassuring counterpoint to the nervous flutter in my stomach. Across the aisle, Melissa, a vision of contrived remorse in a demure dress that probably cost more than my last month's grocery bill, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her performance worthy of an Oscar. "The evidence, Your Honor," Mr. Peterson boomed, his voice a weaponized baritone that sliced through the courtroom's hushed anticipation, "is irrefutable. Mrs. Carter has engaged in a pattern of deceit and reckless behavior that has not only jeopardized the sanctity of their marriage, but, more importantly, endangered the well-being of their children." He laid out the case with the precision of a surgeon, the infidelity, the substance abuse, the neglected children, the financial recklessness, each transgression a scalpel dissecting the corpse of our marriage, exposing the rot that had been festering beneath the surface. Melissa's lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, countered with a desperate flurry of deflections and accusations, his voice a theatrical crescendo of indignation. "My client, Your Honor, is a victim of circumstance, a woman driven to despair by her husband's emotional neglect, his relentless pursuit of career advancement at the expense of his family." He painted a picture of me as a workaholic, an absentee husband, a man whose ambition had blinded him to his wife's needs, her loneliness, her very existence. It was a masterful performance, A carefully crafted narrative designed to elicit sympathy, to shift the blame, to cast me as the villain in this domestic drama. But the performance was undermined by the undeniable facts. The witnesses, Amy, the babysitter, even my own mother-in-law testified to Melissa's erratic behavior, her escalating drinking, her disregard for her children's well-being. The evidence, the credit card statements, the emails, the photos, painted a damning portrait of a woman who had prioritized her own desires above her responsibilities as a wife and a mother. The judge, a stern woman with eyes that missed nothing, listened intently, her expression a mask of judicial neutrality. But I saw the flicker of disapproval in her gaze, the subtle tightening of her lips that betrayed her growing disdain for Melissa's theatrics. Mrs. Carter, she finally interjected, her voice a gavel of authority. Your attempts to portray yourself as a victim are unconvincing. Your actions speak louder than your lawyer's words. You have endangered your children, jeopardized your family's financial stability, and betrayed the trust of your husband. These are not the actions of a responsible parent, a loving wife, a woman deserving of sympathy. Melissa's carefully constructed facade crumbled, her face contorting with a mixture of anger, fear, and a dawning realization that her carefully orchestrated performance had failed. She had underestimated me, underestimated the strength of my resolve, underestimated the power of truth. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, the air thick with anticipation as the judge prepared to deliver her verdict. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the cage of my anxieties. This was it, the moment of truth, the culmination of months of struggle, of heartache, of a battle fought not just in the courtroom but in the depths of my own soul. And as I waited, my fate and the future of my children hanging in the balance, a strange calm settled over me. I had done everything I could. I had gathered the evidence, exposed the lies, fought for my right to be a father, a protector, a man worthy of respect. The rest, I realized, was out of my hands. The judge would decide, and whatever the outcome, I knew that I had emerged from this crucible stronger, wiser, more resilient than ever before. For I had faced my demons, conquered my fears, and reclaimed my right to a life that was truly my own. The courtroom, a stage for human drama disguised as legal proceedings, held its breath. The silence crackled with anticipation, the weight of judgment hanging heavy in the air. I sat beside Mr. Peterson, my lawyer, his stoic presence a stark contrast to the frantic drumbeat of my own heart. Across the aisle, Melissa, her carefully constructed facade of composure finally shattered, stared at the judge, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. Judge Thompson, a woman whose stern demeanor and no-nonsense reputation were legendary in the Alexandria courthouse, cleared her throat, her voice a gavel of authority that silenced the whispers and rustling of anticipation. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, she began, her gaze sweeping over us, her words measured and deliberate. This court has heard the evidence, reviewed the testimonies, and considered the arguments presented by both parties. The decision before me is not one I take lightly, for it involves not only the dissolution of a marriage, but more importantly, the well-being of two innocent children. She paused, her eyes settling on Melissa, a flicker of disapproval crossing her face. Mrs. Carter, she continued, her voice hardening, your actions have been reprehensible. You have betrayed your husband's trust, endangered your children's safety, and demonstrated a reckless disregard for the responsibilities of marriage and parenthood. Melissa flinched, her carefully rehearsed excuses and crocodile tears failing to mask the shame that now burned in her cheeks. The courtroom, once a stage for her performance of victimhood, now felt like a prison, the judgment in the air a heavy weight on her shoulders. Mr. Carter, the judge continued, her gaze shifting to me, a hint of sympathy softening her stern expression. You have shown remarkable patience and resilience in the face of your wife's betrayals. You have prioritized your children's well-being above your own pain, and you have demonstrated a commitment to providing a stable and loving home for them. A wave of relief washed over me, the tension in my shoulders easing, the knot in my stomach loosening its grip. The judge's words were a validation, a recognition of the sacrifices I had made, the battles I had fought, the love I had poured into my children, even as my marriage crumbled around me. Therefore, Judge Thompson declared, her voice ringing with authority, this court grants Mr. Adrian Carter primary custody of his two minor children, Noah and Lily. Mrs. Melissa Carter will be granted supervised visitation rights, contingent on her continued participation in a court-approved rehabilitation program and ongoing therapy sessions. A gasp escaped Melissa's lips, her carefully constructed world imploding around her. She had gambled and lost, her manipulations backfiring, her lies exposed, her freedom snatched away by the very system she had tried to manipulate. Furthermore, the judge continued, her voice unwavering, Mr. Carter will retain ownership of the marital home and a significant portion of the couple's assets, as outlined in the prenuptial agreement. Mrs. Carter will receive a limited settlement, contingent on her compliance with the court's orders regarding her rehabilitation and visitation schedule. The verdict was a victory, a vindication of the truth, a testament to the power of perseverance and the unwavering love of a father. But it was also a sobering reminder of the fragility of trust, the consequences of betrayal, and the long road to healing that lay ahead. As I walked out of the courtroom, my children's hands clasped tightly in mine, a mix of relief, gratitude, and a profound sense of responsibility washed over me. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. I had a new life to build, a new future to forge, a new definition of family to create. And as I looked at my children, their eyes shining with a mix of confusion and hope, I knew that I would face the challenges ahead with the same determination, the same resilience, the same unwavering love that had carried me through the darkest of times. For they were my world, my reason for being, the anchors that would keep me grounded as I navigated the uncharted waters of single parenthood, the complexities of co-parenting with a woman who had broken my heart, and the ever-present hope of finding a love that was true, a love that would heal the wounds of the past and illuminate the path to a brighter future. The house, once a battleground of marital discord and neglected chores, was slowly transforming into a haven of stability and childish laughter. The remnants of Melissa's reign, the overflowing shoe racks, the designer handbags gathering dust in the closet, the lingering scent of expensive perfume that had once masked the stench of her deceit, were gradually fading, replaced by the comforting aroma of freshly baked cookies, the cheerful chaos of Lego creations, and the sound of bedtime stories echoing through the hallways. "Daddy, can we build a fort today?" Noah asked, his eyes wide with anticipation, his smile a beacon of hope that melted the last vestiges of bitterness in my heart. "A fort?" I echoed, ruffling his hair, the gesture of familiar comfort in this new landscape of single parenthood. "Absolutely. We'll build the most epic fort this house has ever seen. It'll have turrets, moats, and maybe even a dragon guarding the entrance." "A dragon?" Lily squealed, her laughter infectious, her enthusiasm a reminder of the simple joys that had been missing from my life for far too long. "Can we make it breathe fire?" "We'll see what we can do." I winked, my heart swelling with a love that transcended the pain of the past, the challenges of the present. The logistics of single parenthood were a juggling act, a constant dance between work deadlines, school runs, grocery shopping, and the never-ending laundry pile that seemed to multiply like rabbits on a spring break bender. But I was finding my rhythm, my confidence growing with each conquered challenge, each hurdle overcome. "You're doing great, Adrian," Emily, my ever-supportive sister, assured me one evening, as we shared a pizza and a much-needed glass of wine. "The kids are happy. The house is, well, it's not a biohazard zone anymore, and you haven't resorted to day drinking yet. That's a win in my book." I chuckled, her dry humor a welcome antidote to the self-doubt that still lingered at the edges of my newfound confidence. "Thanks, Em. I'm trying. It's just a lot. But I wouldn't trade it for the world." And I meant it. The divorce had been a crucible, A trial by fire that had forged a new me, a stronger me, a man who was finally in control of his own destiny. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it had all been a catalyst for growth, a necessary shedding of the skin that had been suffocating my spirit. I was learning to be both father and mother, provider and nurturer, the disciplinarian and the confidant. I was rediscovering the joys of bedtime stories, the thrill of building pillow forts, the simple pleasure of watching my children grow and learn and explore the world with an innocence that I had almost forgotten. Co-parenting with Melissa was a different kind of challenge. A tightrope walk between maintaining boundaries and fostering a healthy relationship for the sake of the kids. Her visits were often strained, her attempts to manipulate and control a constant source of frustration. But I was learning to navigate her emotional landmines, my responses measured, my focus unwavering. The journey ahead was still long, the road uncertain. But as I looked at my children, their laughter echoing through the house, their love a beacon in the darkness, I knew that I was not alone. I had my family, my friends, my newfound strength, and the unwavering belief that I could and would create a future filled with joy, fulfillment, and a love that was true. A love that would heal the wounds of the past and illuminate the path to a brighter tomorrow.